Hi everyone, it's Guillaume from Startup Basecamp. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. During the show, you will have the opportunity to meet the best climate tech founders, investors, and experts from both Silicon Valley and around the globe. They will share with you their stories and personal journeys into this growing and exciting industry, giving you some insight into the ecosystems that help you to take part in the fight against climate change and benefit from the opportunities it can represent. The podcast is divided in two small interviews. So in the first part, you will get to know our speakers, their perspectives on the climate crisis and how climate tech is changing the game. The second part of the discussion will be for members of our community who will learn the speakers' secret sauce on how to and share with you their unique expertise on topics such as fundraising, management, strategy, and so on, to help you to become a better leader in your field. So before we start, I would like to quickly share what we are doing at Startup Basecamp to support climate tech founders in accessing resources and gaining visibility with investors they seek. Our initiatives include a membership-based community platform offering access to a dedicated Slack group with a growing number of founders, experts, and investors from around the world, and a series of exclusive content such as interviews, weekly job listings, events, and our quarterly online pitch of night opportunity. But more than a place where you can learn, exchange, and grow, we are building a matchmaking service to facilitate connections between our members and top investors and experts in the field. And soon, alongside with other top investors, we will be launching a small fund to co-invest in the growth and acceleration of our members. Finally, all of this is possible because of your support and donations. We are a small self-funded team, and we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. So please share one episode with a friend and subscribe to the channels. As an added bonus, we will plant a tree for each of our subscribers each time we reach 1,000 new fans or donors. Do not hesitate to connect with me via social media or email guillaume@startupbasecamp. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope to get in touch with you soon. And now, let's go for the show. Hi everyone, during this new episode of our Founder Series, we are sitting down with Marcus Lovell, CEO of Neutral. Neutral is the first pure carbon neutral food company in the US and works directly with dairy farmers and beef ranchers to mitigate their climate impact and deliver carbon neutral food products to consumers in more than 2,000 locations. It was utterly fascinating to converse with Marcus and learn the ins and outs of the dairy industry and how Neutral is tackling the emissions of a notoriously difficult sector to decarbonize. Marcus first got involved in the sector when he came to the US 20 years ago to run a family dairy farm. He has since worked with the best at Alphabet, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and the Harvard Entrepreneurship program in a variety of leadership roles. With his love for the countryside and farm life, he naturally found his way back by combining his business acumen, passion for climate change, and love of the country through his work at Neutral. As 93% of Americans have dairy milk in their refrigerators, it's imperative that the sector's emissions are tackled heads-on immediately. And Marcus is just doing that with Neutral. During the episode, we got to ask him where do the main dairy industry emissions come from, how does he go about decarbonizing the industry, how does he get farmers on board, and what are the future market opportunities for companies in the space. The second part of the show, Marcus explains how he got celebrity investors such as LeBron James or Mark Cuban to embrace his vision and invest in the company. He will also share how he has sold his story and now how he keeps the smile on his face despite the workload. Marcus, welcome to the show. Hi Marcus, welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm super happy to have you here with us today. I believe it's going to be a great opportunity to hear your story and learn more about your exciting adventure with Neutral to decarbonize our food system, starting with the dairy industry in the US. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Guillaume. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, Marcus. Very excited as well. So before we start, that's the tradition here. Can you give us a 30-second intro about Neutral?
Neutral, the first pure carbon neutral food company in the US. That's who we are. We work directly with dairy farmers and increasingly beef ranchers to mitigate climate impact. And we bundle that reduction, that mitigation, that sequestration with our products to sell food staples, most importantly, food staples, because that's where the impact is. So we have a milk product, we've launched a butter product, we have a cream half and half product, but you'll see us increasingly in staples, and we believe in a carbon neutral food aisle in the US and actually beyond the US too. And it's a way that consumers can influence directly influence agriculture. So that's who we are.
So let's start from the top. Can you tell us a bit more about your personal story and background? I mean, what are you passionate about? What do you love to do besides leading Neutral? What makes you feel inspired or like your best self? As I always ask, who's Marcus?
Well, thank you for asking that question, Guillaume. I suppose I've always been a startup person. I've done startups most of my life, small companies, though I have worked in some big companies as well. And but I came to America about 20 years ago, and I came to America curiously to run a family dairy farm. It wasn't what I was doing before. It's not what I do full time now, but for about 3 to 4 years, I ran a dairy farm. Um, and that particular piece of work, and I sit on that dairy farm today, that particular piece of work has defined a lot about what I'm now doing at Neutral. And in fact, I look at this farm in an entirely different way literally because of the last year or two of the work I've done with climate and with climate change. So you'll see that as a theme. I love being here. I love being out in the country. I love being on the farm. And I think that has increasingly defined who I am and how I think about things, and trying to connect climate as we are indeed through the product back through to what we're doing with food and agriculture is incredibly important. I think there's a growing realization that wasn't here 5, 10 years ago and I think people understand that food and agricultural systems have an enormous impact on climate, and for the good and for the bad. And I think, I mean, that number can be as high as 37% in one of the IPCC reports. When you look at systems, that's food and agriculture systems, that transportation related to that. Those numbers, we can argue about whether those numbers 20%, 30%, 37%, but it's a very big pillar of climate change relates to food and agriculture. Anyway, well, I'm sure we're going to dig in on that before,
Yeah,
but
so before we jump into that, and thanks for sharing this interesting part of your story, like being a dairy farmer as well, and moving to the US for that. But I saw also that you have this incredible also I would say more large corporate and founders experience. You also are entrepreneurs in Harvard, which I don't know exactly what it involves, but definitely I'm sure there's exciting things that you're doing there, supporting breakthrough energy venture. So along that journey, besides the really like being on the ground on the dairy side, on the farmland, I would say, what has been during this more like corporate and founding journey that you had so far? One or two maybe pieces of experience that in a way gave you an edge to lead Neutral today.
okay. Okay, something that's relevant for your audience. I think. I mean, I've done a lot of startup work, as I mentioned, but I've also done a lot of startup cleanup work. I think is for about a decade, I worked with Northeast venture capital firms, sorting out, well, I don't know what was maybe politely called their problem children, but companies that perhaps weren't working quite as well as they should, had market issues, board issues, financial issues, even legal issues. So I did a fair amount of work sorting out companies. It's really hard, but it's surprisingly rewarding when you have some kind of success. As I always say to VCs, I mean, it's all the first. If you have 10 companies in your portfolio, the first two will just go screaming out of the gates. You don't even need to sit on their boards. They don't really need any of your help. All you do is worry and regret that you weren't able to put more money into them. And then you have maybe your bottom two that, once you've closed that deal, you go, oh my God, why did I make those investments? Why didn't I think that through? And then in the middle, you have maybe 6 of the 10 that just need a lot of help, a lot of nursing. And that's often where the sort of major, if you like, the sort of 1x, 2x return of a fund comes from. You just make sure they get through the process. They at least return your money and do hopefully better than that. I think that's a really important area and often gets overlooked. There's probably very little you can do about those bottom two. And as curiously, there's probably very little you can do about those top two. In that middle ground, there's a lot of work to be done. And I enjoyed that. So that was one of the pieces of background, if you like, that's relevant to what I'm doing. I also I've been fortunate enough to work at Google. I've worked at JP Morgan, I've worked at Goldman Sachs, and I've done a number of other large entities. And I think that's always helpful because I'm always shocked when I go into those organizations, just the depth and level of resources that are available to one. And it's kind of, it's often very productive times because you have access to so much computing power, people, access to customers. Often there are a bunch of constraints in large organizations, which maybe stops you doing the things you would like to do. But it's a reminder of what it's like having access to those resources. So I'm very grateful for the time I've spent in some of those larger organizations.
So in all of this, in this whole journey that you had, what was in a way your driver to jump into this climate tech industry, as we call it today? Do you have any specific aha moment that you can record or would define as such?
Well, I was lucky enough, I am lucky enough to sit on the commercial advisory board of Breakthrough Energy. So I've watched an extraordinary number of fantastic companies go through that portfolio. I think they're now in excess of 100 companies. I was fortunate enough to be able to help out and advise on this very, very small startup. It was 2 people a year and a half ago. And they needed a CEO, so I was able to jump in and do that. So so the question, I suppose, was why that company rather than many of the other companies. And I think it goes back to that dairy story and trying to make sense of land and make sense of agriculture. See food as a mechanism for really driving climate change, and curiously, the company's become even more than just carbon neutral. The company's called neutral. It's pretty clear what we do, but it's about more than that. It's about biodiversity. It's about land management. It's about nutrient management. It's about animal welfare. It's even about rural equity. I mean, I'm not sure that this tiny company can manage all those things, but all of those things sort of come together, and that makes it particularly fascinating for me. So it feels existential to me, the importance of working and making sense of food and agriculture in this country.
So before we start going into details about Neutral, I'd like to zoom out, as we usually do in this show, and really try to understand the overall context that you're navigating on. So let's try to get your overview on the so-called dairy industry landscape today. I'd like to start maybe with your insights and data point regarding, and you already mentioned some figures at the beginning of the conversation, but in terms of quantity of emission that the dairy industry can represent, the type of source that you find, that those emissions comes from, in this dairy value chain, I would say, and the potential impact that it can have on climate change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we did a lot of work, a lot of analysis on food systems and where the emissions were coming from. And the emissions come from, to a very large extent, from animal proteins. not just animal proteins, but the process of creating the feed necessarily for animal proteins. So that's why you see us involved in milk, in butter. You'll see us in other dairy products. It's why you will see us involved in beef, because beef perhaps has the largest footprint of all kind of major staples. So when we graphed all of this up, it was clear that something like 80+% of the emissions related to animal proteins. And you could argue, well, why not just do an alternative protein, or why not do a plant-based alternative? And I'm a big fan of those, actually. I'm a really big fan of those companies. And there's some these extraordinary companies and products started. But the truth is 93% of American households have dairy milk in their refrigerator. So that's where they are today. And that's where the impact is today. So you need to work with that. You need to work with those dairy farms. You need to work with those beef ranchers, because that's where the impact is. And so when we look at that impact, and we see where it's coming from, it's significantly dominated by the on-farm emissions. Unlike some other products where the manufacturing process may be dominant, or the transportation process may be dominant, or even the consumer end may be dominant. In animal proteins, and you can look at, say, milk as an example. 72%, so over 2/3 of it relates to on-farm emissions, whereas the remaining piece relates to, say, 6% might be processing, or 4% packaging, or 8% transportation, or 7% or consumer or post-consumer waste. So only that sort of that small minority relates to everything beyond the farm gate. So if you're going to do something about emissions in agriculture and animal agriculture, and that's really where the emissions are coming from, you need to work on the farm. So all of our focus in what we do is work with farmers and ranchers to help them, and never tell them, by the way, and we can talk about that, but to help them mitigate those emissions.
So if we double click on the really like the on-farm emissions per se, if you could tell us a little bit more, like, where are they coming from, in which state of the value chain of it, and how eventually, like, which one do you think are the most significant that needs to be monitored, and what are the alternative or solution existing to mitigate those emissions at those really, like, in a way, granular level during this value chain of dairy production on farm?
Okay. So, again, so when we look at that vast bulk that comes from on-farm, again, it splits into roughly 3 pillars. One relates to manure and manure management, and the emissions that relate to that, and we can talk about that in a moment. Another one relates to the enteric emissions, which is the rumen emissions from the cow's stomach, the methane that's coming out from the stomach, and that's enteric. So that's and then the last third is really all of the sort of crop management, and all of the bits that go around with nitrogen on the fields, managing all the other parts of the farm activity. So there's sort of third, and we've got projects in each one of those.
And when you look at them in itself, like you mentioned, third, what is the specific, like, ways that were applied in the past before you guys come into play, and that were, like, strongly, creating greenhouse gases, and what are, in a way, the solution that you deploy today that are existing to mitigate those greenhouse gas emission?
Right. So we generally work with smaller family dairy farms in the sort of 150 to 200 cow sort of region, if you like, average 150 to 200 cows. So small, certainly small compared to the very, very large dairy farms. Most of the manure management historically used to go into a manure pit, and a manure pit or a manure lagoon is almost a sort of perfect breeding breeding ground for methane. I mean, if you couldn't design a more anaerobically perfect system for producing methane. So many of the smaller farms don't lend themselves to the sort of high fixed costs and civil engineering costs of an anaerobic digester, though we have invested in those as well. And so we're doing probably more simpler techniques, things like solid liquid manure separation, where you're really pulling out the volatile solids, the volatile manure solids, and separating them out from the liquids. And in doing so, you're basically stopping almost completely the methane production. You're incidentally creating a dry, much more concentrated compost that the farmer can then use. And every time we go on to do a project, there's almost always a co-benefit related to it. And in this particular case, and on several other projects we've done this, the farmer is then transporting that. So rather than transporting liquid manure, which is expensive, because just the sheer volumes you have to move, you can now transport, or he or she can now transport the solids, which is a fraction of that, and then reincorporate those in the field. So that's certainly one of a number of examples on the manure side.
And which operation that you look at right now within this all the dairy value chain, that sounds to look like very extremely hard in a way to decarbonize, and maybe that could be a missing opportunities for young startup out there that maybe are working on something like that in the lab, or that maybe should start to work on, because you really see that here it's like there's a big challenge. Do you have any examples?
I think what a great, you make a great point. It's an enormous, cliche, but an sort of open field, as it were. There's so much you could do. I don't know how we're going to do all of this. I know we've got 10, 20 projects, interventions going on, and we're doing some very standard ones that the USDA would recognize and the industry would recognize, but we're also doing some quite innovative things. All I know is that that's really an enormous source of emissions. There are a bunch of other things that we want to resolve in agriculture, which brings in things like biodiversity and nutrient management and animal welfare. But so there's an enormous opportunity to do that, and it's a journey really for our customers. And we have to be incredibly transparent. Some of the things we do won't work, and some of the things we're already doing probably won't turn out to have the mitigation that we're anticipating. But we will document that, and we'll make sure we share that to everybody. So I think there's an enormous, there's so much impact there that I think there will be lots of new solutions. Even on the enteric emission sides, which is a big source of, and people increasingly understand that cows' methane from their stomach is a big impact, has a big impact. We're doing a bunch of trials with Aspergillus and other seaweed trials, and we're super excited about that work that we're doing. But we're also doing some really interesting, innovative work with new types of forage planted in or overseeded into pastures. And I think this is really exciting work, because if we can have a mitigation of that, enteric emissions through a more biodiverse, more rich pasture, then we've done two things as well. We've created more biodiversity, we've created a more interesting pasture, more phytochemicals. I think that the cows will be healthier, in addition to mitigating, pushing down that enteric methane. So some of the work we're doing with what we call tannin-rich, tannin because of tannin being the bitter and acidic substance that you see in a red wine or grapes or in the edge of a sour pear. These mitigate the impacts on the microbes that produce the methagenic microbes that produce that methane. So this is incredibly powerful if we can do that. So we're doing some very exciting work with some colleagues and friends over at Oregon State University and Colorado State University, particularly Oregon State University, on planting different crop mixtures. I'm really excited about that, because I think pasture-based animals is an important part of the future.
So, and thank you so much for sharing really like a little bit more in depth what's happening on the farmland and all of those innovations that you guys are contributing to put in place and in a way coordinate. So I like to take a little bit more like a zoom out in terms of like the regulatory like framework. Like, I mean, if you look at like the dairy industry today, like in ways to decarbonize it, I mean, I believe like if we had the journey, the end of the journey would be 100, we probably are like 15, 20 in terms of the scale. So what are the regulation currently like in place to support and accelerate the decarbonization of the dairy industry, and which one maybe according to you is missing and should in a way be passed to really like go mainstream in a way?
Well, not a lot of regulation. I mean, it's always, as with so many things, it's stick and carrot, and most of it is carrot at the moment. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is an important piece of legislation. I think that provided an impetus, only an impetus, and it's going to need a lot more than that, a catalyst of $20 billion towards climate smart practices on farms. So I think that's a great, really exciting and a great step forward. So that was a recent piece of legislation. On the regulations, and there've always been nutrient management plans. The states are tightening those up. As you tighten up your nutrient management plans, you're ultimately controlling the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium as well, but mainly nitrogen that you're putting onto fields. That has an impact because we now know that nitrous oxide, which is a big contributor, 200 times the impact on a per molecule basis of carbon dioxide, 200 times more, it comes out as a result of putting too much nitrogen on field. So you're seeing pressure coming from different areas. But no, not a lot of regulation in the US. You're seeing interesting and you're seeing things in Holland and in Ireland and in New Zealand, where the governments are beginning to start to push the dairy industry into controlling some of these emissions, and those are not always going very well. But in the US, there's very little direct regulation in this area. We're trying to, by the way, we're not surprising the US believes in market-driven approaches, and there's nothing more market-driven about what we're doing. We're trying to say to consumers, no, if you buy this milk, you will create this change. And it's very hard for a consumer. It's very hard for a consumer to have an impact on the maritime shipping industry or the extraction of lithium or cobalt. I mean, how do they even begin to have it and to start there? But with their consumer choices in the supermarket, in the grocery store, they can actually start to direct. And so our covenant, if you like, our compact or our covenant with consumers is that the more milk you buy, the more of these products, the more projects we'll do on farms, and we'll bring you along that journey. We'll tell you exactly what we're doing. That's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful, and we think it's there. We think it's nascent. I don't think it's happened. I think there are very few brands that have done that. We hope there will be others. You see these incremental claims by brands, which is good. It's exactly what they should be. But it's always the brand first, and in addition, we're doing X, Y, and Z. In addition, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030, or in addition, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, or we've done this project. And that's great, but we're sort of kind of like 180 degrees. It's a point of view change. No, today, because I just haven't one on my desk, today, we're going to be carbon neutral today. And that's what we do. That's all we do. And we're going to link you directly with our farmers on that journey. And we'll get some things right, and we'll get some things wrong, but we'll sure as hell make sure that you know as we go along. So it's really about making consumers aware that they can make a difference today.
I think it's a perfect, segue to for the last question of this section before we dive a little bit more into the company. So as everyone knows, there's always some risk of controversy around like green or neutral products, which are going, mainstream and in a way are not staying at the farmers market level of magnitude or scale. Often consumer might be suspicious and thinking of like, maybe there's some sort of greenwashing here. It's very hard for us to verify what the brand is like giving us here. So according to you, what is the real demand from consumer, which I believe can be translated into purchase adoption level for those greener products, and what is important to be done and communicated on the brand side in order to build trust or rebuild the trust? What needs to change to accelerate those market adoption and avoid this greenwashing that can be present as well?
That's a great question. I think there is a dissonance there. There's clearly a dissonance. 54%, that fascinating Yale study a way back, and I think it's probably moved on from here. 54% of Americans are alarmed or deeply concerned about climate change. Now, if those words mean anything at all, alarmed or deeply concerned, that surely that translates into some sort of purchasing, some lifestyle choice, some point of view, some purchasing decision, how you run your life. But it doesn't really. The number of real purchases is far less than that. So I think either the brands have done a poor job communicating, maybe the products aren't there yet. But at some point, if those words mean anything at all, they're going to flip around, and that's going to drive consumers will drive a lot of change here. I think greenwashing, I think consumers are right to be skeptical. And I think the only answer to that is to be as incredibly transparent as possible. And we are attempting to do that. It's sort of, I almost think it doesn't apply to us. Of course it does, Guillaume, but because that's all we do. I mean, our brand is entirely based on the work we do on farms and how much change we can create. It's not incremental to us. It's not peripheral. It's not a proxy. It's all that we are. So I hope the consumers will see that with us. But I think consumers are wide, and they're watching very, very closely, and they can see it. And by the way, you don't get this stuff right, consumers will know. We do a lot of things with our brand, and we have we account for carbon on a monthly basis. We have third party auditors. SCS have audited us as carbon neutral. We have an incredibly strong scientific advisory board and advisors. I mentioned Oregon State. I mentioned Colorado State University, Penn State, Arkansas University. We have incredibly strong scientific advisors, and the core of what we do is science-led. The understanding when I mentioned those numbers about where the carbon impact comes from on a farm, it comes from a deep amount of work that we've done with Dr. Greg Toma, who's the seminal expert in this area, and understanding at a very deep level where those emissions are. So we have great science, we have third-party auditors, and we are who we are. That's there's not a person in the company that doesn't believe in what I genuinely can say. That there's not a person in the company that doesn't believe in what we're doing. Maybe it's just meet us at an exhibition, meet us at a conference, meet us in our offices, or meet us, most importantly, meet us on a farm. It's just who we are. And our challenge though is translating that to consumers and getting them to see us as a vehicle for change, as a conduit for change.
So let's go deeper now into Neutral in itself. Like, can you refresh us a little bit on the story behind those two co-founders that therefore you met? What was the initial gap they identified that led to the current version of Neutral, and in a way, why did Neutral have to exist? I mean, you mentioned and gave us already pieces of the answer, but if you could encapsulate that in a short segment.
I think it was an insight, and that others have had too, but haven't necessarily acted on in quite the same forceful way as this company has, is that consumers are kind of looking for a way to express their climate anxiety. to find a way to do something. They're constantly asking, particularly when you ask your children, and thinking, what can I do? What actually can I do? And that's really hard. And this is this vacant white space, which was, well, you can do it. We all now know that food and agriculture has this monster impact. Well, you can do it through your choices there. As I said, it's very hard with maritime shipping to make an impact. So I think that was the key insight. And I think we'll see other people in this, and I encourage other people to come into this sector. And we saw Kroger's the other day announce a carbon neutral egg. I think it's in selective stores, maybe the end of this year, early next year. I'm amazed actually how much white space we've been given as a company, because this stuff seems too important. And when I joined just over a year and a half ago, there were two of us in the business at the time, or two extra people, two fantastic people in the business at the time. But we have gone from 30 stores to over 2,000 stores in 9 months. We're now in over 2,000 stores across the United States, in Whole Foods, in Sprouts, in Target, in about 45% of the natural independent stores. And I think people are reacting to it. It's been, we've got masses of work to do to make the sort of impact that we want to make. So I think this core, and it certainly doesn't come from me, but I think it may come directly from Bill Gates. I think when he set up Breakthrough Energy, and we touched on Breakthrough Energy earlier, he had this concept of a half a gigaton. Not that every single company in the portfolio has to mitigate half a gigaton a year of emissions. By the way, just for your listeners, there's probably 51 gigatons a year emitted from human-generated sources, 51 gigatons. So half a gigaton is 1% of that, so a significant amount. So he's not saying that every company needs to do it, because it's an enormous amount, but every company needs to be involved in an industry or be part of a catalytic process or be able to nudge something forward that can make that kind of impact. Which is why, though I think there's some fantastic discretionary products out there, whether
like different products touching the meat industry as well. But the most critical part, and I think probably one of the most challenging part, is really like this support on the land that you do with the farmers themselves. And I'd like to dig a little bit more into if you could walk us through the process. How does it work when you guys choose to partner with one of those farmers? What is the process to get neutral involved? What type of emission do you have to calculate? Do you guys develop your own software capabilities, or do you have sensors? What are the reporting, and then the real support that you can give to those farmers? If you could help us to visualize that whole value chain that helps you to really have this high quality product, and then therefore be able also to compensate and offset really what has been not changed thanks to the action that you put in place. What's your secret sauce, in a way?
Well, going on to farms is, to me, one of the great privileges of this job. To be able to walk around a herd, to be able to talk to dairy farmers in particular, though increasingly beef ranchers as well. It's just a complete pleasure to do that. Well, first of all, one of the things you do when you walk onto a farm is ask a bunch of questions. You certainly don't tell a farmer. I learned that very early on. What to do. We find that nearly all farmers have a long list of projects they would like to do. Often they just there's an education piece, there's an advice piece, there's a financial piece necessary to sort of nudge them forward. We are often the catalytic money that makes a project happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened. USDA may have, NRCS may have made a cost share. The farmer, him or herself, may well have be prepared to put some money up, but there's just something missing, and often we've come onto a farm and provided that last piece of finance and advice that's done that. You're right about measurement, reporting, and verification. That's absolutely critical to what we do. we have a lot of, we've developed a lot of protocols around and continue to develop protocols around these interventions. So think we have a very good understanding of each of these interventions. And it's a growing list the whole time because, I'm sure in a few years' time we'll be doing projects that we don't even conceive of now. We need to report on that and we need to verify that and we need to monitor that over time because we're not going to bring, if you like, that into our carbon accounting, saying we have mitigated or sequestered that until we know for certain we have. So we have a lot of trials going on with universities in parallel. So software, protocols, data management, and a big farm team run by a fantastic person, Anne Raidhill, who runs that, she herself, she's been on a number of podcasts, she herself, a fifth generation Nebraskan farming family, and she and an incredibly talented carbon and farming team are going onto farms and doing this. And our job is to scale that. We were worried about scaling, but it hasn't proved to be a problem. We feel that we can scale our farm projects alongside, our product sales, and we need to do that obviously because that's our covenant.
So before we cover a bit more like the scalability of your operation, I'd like to just double click on the farmer per se. I mean, and I know per experience, as I'm also from the countryside, that farmers can be, very reluctant or suspicious for changes coming from, people who are not from the land sometimes or from the city in itself. So when you guys started to collaborate, and you mentioned part of your team, you have someone who, in a way, I believe, speak the same languages. But what was the initial maybe challenges that you guys have to onboard those farmers, and in a way, what needed to be done to convince them to work with you? What was the key elements there?
Wow, if you sit down and spend enough time and listen and you genuinely want to help these farmers make changes that are positive, there is no resistance. And there just isn't, because people, I don't think I've ever had a bad conversation with a farmer. But it is a manner that you have to approach that, as you said, you yourself from an ex-farming family, you know what it's like. I think most farmers want to do this work. They're one of the few groups of people, I've said it before, one of the few groups of people that think multi-generationally. They think about their children and they think about their grandchildren in a way that a lot of traditional capital, if I can anonymize it like that, does not think. So they see themselves as stewards of the land. Often the kind of commodity-like system that we operate in, the modern agricultural systems that we operate in, don't allow them to be the stewards that they rightfully should be, but they absolutely believe they are and can be. And we need to find a way of helping them do that, rather than being trapped in a form of agriculture that continues to lose soil, have nutrient runoff, perhaps to create really quite nutrient poor food. I think there's such an interesting amount of science now coming up about the nutrient density of food, whether that be in corn or vegetables or all meat, entirely dependent on the farming systems that supported that. So farmers want to do the right things, they're often constrained, and if we can just be a small nudge and help in that area, and I hope it'd be a very large nudge and help, because I'm very ambitious for neutral, not because I'm ambitious for the numbers so much, financial. I'm ambitious because we can make real change. Consumers, by buying neutral foods, not just our neutral foods, but neutral foods, could make real change. That's incredibly cool.
So, a couple of more questions before we move on with this first part of the interview. As I mentioned before, and I think which is, and you show us here for the people watching the video and the visual of this conversation, this labeling and this packaging that you guys decided to go with. why making this strategic choice at first? And is it more expensive? Do you have a large green premium that needs to be applied to those dairy products as of today? Is it something that you can therefore control better in terms of quality, in terms of marketing and branding, and also maybe allow the farmers, the producer, to get a bigger cut than what you would get out of a regular, I would say, a wholesaler of dairy that is buying his production. So what was the initial thought there, and why going that way, and then really having this whole, in a way, control of the value chain?
The green premium, I mean, our product, when you see it in Whole Foods, when you see it in Sprouts or Fresh Direct or Instacart, you'll see it's priced at market. It's an organic, it's a fantastically great milk. It's organic milk, it's pasture raised, it's very nutrient rich. I can taste the difference between this and many other milks. So it's a great product, but it's priced at market. At the moment, there are bigger fluctuations in the business, whether through logistics, through packaging, supply, shrinkage, that are bigger than the, if you like, the green premium that we're incurring by doing all of these projects. Clearly, we're spending a lot of money now on farmers. We're also trying to build a brand. In the short term, from a purely company point of view, Guillaume, our job is to try and build that brand so people are aware that they have these choices. So the real focus on the money and the real focus on the money and the money that we've invested and the capital and the company is to grow that brand. There will be a green premium there. We're not sure where that's going to settle out. We just don't know. At the moment, the products are priced to market. They're at the higher end of the dairy. They're absolutely at the higher end of the dairy category because they're organic, pasture raised. So you'll see that up at the sort of top end of where the organic milks are. I mean, interestingly, it is also a real objective of both mine and the companies and everybody in the company is that ultimately this is a product or a set of staple products that we want everybody, maybe that's naive, but not necessarily everybody, but most people in America to be able to afford, to be able to, go, as they say, sort of 6 inches to the right or 6 inches to the left, pull this product off and it to be affordable. So affordability is a big goal for us because there's no point us producing some kind of high-end organic perennial pretzel. Not that isn't a bad product. And it's a really important product. But if it's only available to us small, then what have you done? It's just that it's all vanity at that point. So affordability for this brand is key long-term objective.
So focusing on the offset part of it, and I think this is also something very interesting that you guys put in place. It's really okay, we're neutral. We definitely know that there's emission involved into the dairy production. We're working hard on decreasing that with the farmers in terms of finding innovation that can help on that, measuring it. And then there's the remaining that unfortunately as of today we're not able to remove, so we will offset it. So how do you select those projects and how do you ensure that in a way they do what they are promising in terms of greenhouse gas removals? And what is the percentage in a way out of regular bottle of milk that you need to put into place to really offset that? Is it 100% that you're offsetting of that production, or you realize that thanks to your effort now you're reaching a certain percentage that is growing with the time and that you see will be hopefully very, very limited at terms?
Mm-hmm. Great set of questions there, of course.
Yeah. There's always a lot of questions, but please go ahead and shoot.
Let's start at the top with offsets. And first of all, offsets are not bad. It's just that they're just not good enough. So offsets are not bad, they're just not good enough. So a decade ago, consumers would have been content with companies doing this sort of work by buying offshore wind farm offsets or parts of the Amazon rainforest offsets. I mean, perfectly valid way of going and genuinely having a positive impact on climate. But consumers are now demanding much more. And I know you've had other climate tech companies on this podcast. So if you're in the cement industry, you need to sort out the cement industry. If you're in the iron and steel industry, you need to sort out the iron and steel industry. And in the agricultural world, I'm not going to call it industry, in the agricultural world, you need to sort out agriculture. So everything that we do is within agriculture. So ultimately, this company is going to be 100% of our own projects that we do on farms, though at the moment we're ramping up to that. When we can't actually offset the mitigation, or we can't mitigate or sequester what's in this particular case, 13 pounds of carbon. When we can't do that within our own projects, we will buy dairy offsets from within the dairy industry. So in that case, it's not always, but significantly anaerobic digesters. So we're effectively investing in anaerobic digesters, someone else's project. So when I say offsets, they're investing in someone else's dairy project, which is what we're doing. Ultimately, the goal, and it's Anne, who I mentioned earlier, and the team as a whole, goals is to move ourselves to 100% of our own projects. So we can actually point to, a huge array of portfolio projects to our consumers.
So what are the current and expected economics of Neutral? I mean, maybe if you can share a little bit more with the audience, like what's your business model?
Well, the business model is really quite simple. Is this covenant, as I mentioned, between consumers and farmers. We're a brand on one end, and on the other end, we're working directly with farmers and beef ranchers. And really everything else in between, we're working with partners and co-packers and logistics companies. And so it's not our intent to invest heavily in that middle part. It is to invest the maximum amount of capital we can and advice at the farmer level. And whatever else we do is to build the brand and connect with consumers. So it's like a dumbbell. I mean, that we work on either end, but we really don't work in the middle. We rely on fantastic set of partners in the middle.
So finally, like, what is the size of the market opportunity that we're talking about? I mean, like, how are you planning to scale your operation? Because you sounds to be very involved at the farm level. I think on the retail point of view, or like the selling the product in itself, you guys already achieved quite a interesting scale by being present in more than 2,000 stores across the US. But how do you ensure that, in a way, the supplies part of it is also growing? Because I guess to be present in those 2,000 stores, you will need to deliver a growing quantity of dairy product. So can you tell us a bit more like what are the next step in this path of in a way growing at what we call at scale in the venture world?
So many of these markets that we're in are absolutely huge, and that's good for us. But that's also why we're here. We're in milk. It's a 10 billion plus grocery retail market, and cheese and milk and butters are in the sort of 3 to 4 to 5 billion markets in the US, grocery markets. These are enormous markets because that's what people are eating, and that's where the farming impact is. So we're excited to be in really, really big markets, because we have to be in really, really big markets to have an impact. I think, I've tasked the team with trying to make sure that we have the systems in place that we can grow and that we can scale. So not what are the systems to manage today's growth, but what systems do we need to have in place on the logistics side, on the quality side, on the ERP side? What are the systems that we need to have in place so that we can be a $100 million business in the next 2 to 3 years? I mean, that's the sort of task I'm asking the team to do. Think about today, sure, but let's make sure we put all of these things in place so that we can grow, so that we're not scrambling at that level. And I think absolutely we can be a $100 million business within 2 or 3 years.
So what's next for Neutral?
Well, I think it's just do good work. Do good work on farms with farmers. Do good, solid block and tackling work on the retail side. Move from 2,000, slightly over 2,000 stores, move to 3,000 to 4,000 stores next year. Bring out one or two new products, and then communicate, and then really communicate to consumers that this is a way that they can make a difference. And I think that's where you'll see the escalation. Is I think we've spent a couple of years now getting the basics right. Now we need to find a way and test, iterate and test ways of communicating with. I mean, is this the right way to do it? Is this milk fights climate change? Is it too strong? Is it too weak? How do we do that? How much do we spend on social media? How much do we go to traditional media? Do we do outside advertising? What influencers and other people can help us tell the story? Who do we collaborate with? This is an extraordinarily ambitious company. Again, actually not really because of the numbers, because of the impact. We're ambitious because we want to make an impact on farms.
So that's also part of the tradition in the show. What's your personal opinion on the climate crisis? I mean, what would be your words to people who are like afraid of all the already visible consequences on a weekly basis that you can see around the world? Are we doomed, as I always ask? What would you tell them?
It was so interesting. That I was teaching a business school class the other day, and fantastic group of students, and they were all talking about, and I assumed the fundamental interest would have been around climate. And actually, when I talked to their professors afterwards, and one thing and another, it was actually about social justice was the biggest issue. And I thought that was intriguing, because it seems to me that climate change is this sort of ever-present issue. And then it made absolutely sense to me, because you have a chance to influence some level of social justice and some of the unfairnesses that exist. Climate change seems so unwieldy, so big, and so difficult to grapple with. But I am optimistic, because I think that there are tipping points, and it's an overused phrase. I think there are tipping points, and I don't think we've got there yet, in people's approach and people's way that they are going to influence. So that, my point earlier about 54% of Americans, well, that hasn't transferred. I mean, 54% of Americans aren't voting with their purchases and their actions. But at some point they will. And I see companies like this, and only just one of these companies like this being conduit for that change. So I'm really optimistic about that. And I think you need to do what you can. You just need to do what's in your control. And sometimes these issues seem too big, but you can make smaller local decisions that add up, and in aggregate, that's very powerful. That's where you see real social change come through.
So how can our listeners of investors, founders, experts around the world can help you?
Well, they can buy our products. That helps drive change. They make people aware of carbon neutral foods as a really important category. They can see this is a mechanism for making great change, and I just to be the supportive of this type of company. It's not as technical as direct air capture. It's not as technical as the latest lithium battery, but oh my God, it's really powerful for making change.
Any question I should have asked you I didn't do for this first part of the interview?
No, other than, of course, my question. to you, Guillaume, is who are you and why are you doing this? Because it's been fascinating. I've very much enjoyed being able to link in and touch a number of your, I'm pointing at another screen over here, some of your podcasts, and you've had a fascinating array of people. So I would love to just reverse for a few minutes, reverse that question to you.
Thanks so much for interviewing me in my own podcast. I love that, Marcus. I think it's quite simple. I'm a dad now. I've always been passionate about nature. I've been fortunate to spend 8 years in Silicon Valley and being close to all of those entrepreneurs that were like thinking that we don't take a no for an answer and we'll try to figure out how to make it work. And I realized on the other side that now this climate crisis, it's not around the corner, it's really like on a day-to-day here. So, it sounded to me when COVID hit and I had to completely change and pivot my business of supporting founders coming to Silicon Valley. Where could I, put my time and energy for? And it sounded like climate and climate tech and founders willing to also build something meaningful there, where the best way I could put my energy and time. So therefore we started what we did, and it's a exciting, difficult journey as well, full of doubt, because we're not monetizing anything, and we have time to time support, financial support that help us to do what we do. But at the same time, it's so energizing, and I think more and more, people in the traditional tech ecosystem, people in the civil, I would say, the civilian job or work in itself are willing to, contribute to supporting founders and people who are changing. And then you have like amazing investors like Bill Gates pushing also capital towards there. And what we realize is like founders need visibility. So what we do, it's really supporting them on that side through the content that we produce, sharing the voice of founders and supporters like you and investors on the podcast was also a good way to have great conversation, but at the same time being able to not keep that conversation just between the two of us and spread that to others. And then our main mission at Startup Basecamp is like founders need capital. So how can we accelerate capital deployment towards those climate tech companies? And that's what we do with this matching service. Now we work with more than 44 funds around the world that have a power of like 7.9 billion of capital to be deployed. We curate, we speak with founders, and then if we think that they make sense, we introduce them to investors. And if investors want the connection, then we establish that connection. So really, the motivation behind that is like, I don't feel anything more meaningful and fulfilling and exciting to be part of this decarbonization of the economy. I think on the business side, there's many things to be done, and that happening. In the investment side as well. And just, next 40 years, I'm hopefully still there, and after we'll see. So why not to spend my time on that? I don't know if it was a great answer.
Oh my God, no, it was fantastic.
It was probably very long as well. I'm sorry, Mark.
No, it's fantastic.
I want to take your time here.
And you've laid down, I think what your series has done is laid down a narrative which winds its way through both founders and investors that I think is extraordinarily interesting, and it's almost an encyclopedia of how you can do things and what things work and what things don't work. So I think that's an important gift to the industry, because you've cataloged that in a very systematic way.
Thank you. And we're starting a new series called the corporate series with Salesforce. So we'll speak with those people in charge of the decarbonization and ESG of the companies, because often there's this greenwashing and they are really doing stuff. They are struggling to also find solutions. So probably many opportunities for founders, but also investors to jump into that and supporting them or having them as clients. And I think they also deserve a voice, Mm-hmm. We'll not probably speak with ExxonMobil, but we'll see. And even though I'm sure they have interesting stuff that are happening on their side. Thank you so much, Marcus, for your time, your incredible insights on the dairy industry, on this incredible work that you do to help consumers to one sip at a time be able to contribute in the fight of climate change. Very exciting to see incredible mind and people like you putting so much time and energy to make this world a better world and cleaner as well. So thank you so much.
Well, Guillaume, thank you. Really enjoyed this conversation. Wonderful conversation. I hope we get to speak again. Thank you for everything that you do. I think it's
Hi, it's Guillaume again. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, do not hesitate to share an episode with a friend. Also, if you value the work we do for the climate tech ecosystem, here is how you can contribute to it. Today, I'm asking for your support and a donation or sponsorship to make the work of our self-funded team more viable. Even a small contribution means a lot to us. In any case, I will invite you to subscribe to our channels and visit our website startupbasecamp.org to discover more episodes like this one. And get your membership to access all our members' exclusive content. So remember, all of this is possible because of your support and donation. And we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. Let's keep in touch, and I hope you will enjoy our next show with us.